I can still picture that morning in Seattle, the soft clatter of silverware, the faint hiss from the espresso machine, the cheerful hum of weekend diners pretending life was lighter than it really was. I sat there, across from my husband, trying to steady my breathing while sunlight spilled through the tall windows and made everything look deceptively warm. Grant Porter, my husband of 12 years, a man the entire company seemed to idolize, was in his element. At 41, with his sharp suit, slick confidence, and easy charm, he carried himself like someone who believed he was untouchable. And maybe he was, until today. Our colleagues filled the long table, laughing, eating, raising their mimosas. I smiled when expected, nodded politely, and kept my hands folded over my purse, the purse where the recording sat waiting. It was small enough to hold with 2 fingers, but it contained enough truth to shatter his carefully constructed life. I had carried it for weeks, carried the weight of it, carried the knowledge of who he truly was, carried the question of whether to confront him, expose him, or simply walk away. I never wanted it to come to this moment. But then Grant lifted his glass. He loved moments like these, when a room fell quiet just to listen to him. The corners of his mouth curled upward, that familiar, confident smirk aimed not at me, but at the audience he adored. "To marriage," he said loudly, pausing for dramatic effect. "Because, as I always tell the guys," he chuckled, already proud of his own punchline, "it's cheaper to keep her than to divorce her." The table erupted. Laughter ricocheted off the walls. Someone slapped the table. A coworker repeated the line, still laughing. A woman across from me covered her mouth, pretending not to enjoy the spectacle. But the worst part? Grant looked straight at me, waiting for me to laugh too, like this humiliation was something I should politely accept. I kept my face still. Inside, something cracked. There was no scream, no trembling, no dramatic gasp. Just a quiet, chilling clarity spreading through my chest. A sensation almost like relief. Grant leaned back, pleased with himself. "Come on, Ev," he teased. "Don't be so serious. It's a joke." A joke. That word echoed in my head like a taunt. A joke, while I sat there with proof of his affair, proof of his abuse of power, proof he had betrayed not just me, but his entire company. He didn't know I had heard every word he whispered to his assistant. He didn't know I had seen the transfer he thought he buried inside a maze of corporate accounts. He didn't know I had spent weeks preparing, quietly, methodically, painfully, for the moment he would reveal exactly the man he had become. And here he was, revealing it in front of everyone. My colleague beside me leaned over. "Are you all right? You look distant." "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just listening?" Grant continued holding court, basking in the attention. His voice boomed again, retelling the line for another coworker who arrived late, emphasizing each word as if it made him clever. "It's cheaper to keep her." More laughter. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the flash drive, the one containing every piece of evidence, the one I had intended to show him privately, the one I had cried over more times than I could count. Now it simply felt like truth. I closed my hand around it. Grant still didn't notice. He didn't notice the shift in my breathing, the lift of my chin, the stillness settling into my shoulders. He didn't notice that the woman sitting across from him was no longer the one he thought he owned. He lifted his glass again. "To my wife," he added carelessly, "for being such a good sport about everything." This time, even the laughter felt uncomfortable. I placed my napkin on the table, looked him directly in the eye, and felt a calm resolve rise inside me. If he wanted an audience for his humiliation, then he would have one for mine, and this time, I wouldn't be the one left shattered. A month before that humiliating brunch in Seattle, everything in my life still looked intact on the surface. Grant and I appeared like a polished corporate couple, navigating long work hours and leadership roles. But beneath that veneer, the cracks had already begun to form. Quiet, hairline fractures at first, then widening under the weight of secrets. It started with an email. I wasn't looking for anything. I was conducting a routine HR audit when I noticed that Grant had personally forwarded a resume to the recruitment team, a young woman named Lila Monroe, 25, with an immaculate academic background and glowing recommendations. What made me pause wasn't her credentials. It was the fact that Grant never involved himself in hiring, especially not for junior roles. He always said it was beneath his pay grade. The second red flag came 2 days after she was hired. A congratulatory email from Grant to Lila, sent at 11:47 p.m. The message itself wasn't inappropriate. But the timing, the tone, the subtle warmth, they gnawed at me. Still, I told myself not to assume the worst. I was a professional. I was his wife. I wanted to trust him. But trust dissolves quickly when facts begin to contradict it. During our standard background verification process, my team flagged something unusual. Lila's bachelor's degree from a well-known university did not match the school's records. When I followed up personally, the registrar responded within minutes. "No student by that name has ever been enrolled here." My stomach dropped. I knew what the ethical response should be: initiate disciplinary proceedings, report it to upper management, suspend Lila's employment. But I didn't do any of that, not yet. I quietly documented everything and watched. And that's when the internal alerts began. Our compliance system, the one I had helped design years ago, flagged a suspicious transaction. A $75,000 consulting bonus Grant had approved for Lila, routed into a newly registered LLC. When I checked the formation date, my breath caught. The company had been created 3 weeks after Lila was hired. There was no consulting agreement, no deliverables, no justification, just Grant's signature and a transfer that screamed embezzlement. The betrayal felt professional and personal all at once. My heart pounded as I sat alone in my office, the Seattle rain streaking down the windows like someone else's grief. I knew I wasn't imagining anything. This was real. This was dangerous. And I still wasn't prepared for what came next. One afternoon, the head of IT knocked on my door, holding a printed message. "This came through our automated safety scan," he said carefully. "You might want to see it." It was a chat transcript between Grant and Lila. "Meet me at the suite, same hotel. Use the service elevator. I booked it under the corporate account. No one checks those." My throat tightened. This wasn't just an affair. This was abuse of power, misuse of company funds, a deliberate effort to hide their relationship behind corporate infrastructure. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe, to think. If I confronted him now, he would deny everything. He always denied, always spun the story, always made me feel irrational, emotional, unreasonable. So instead, I did what he never expected. I prepared. Because the company was gearing up for a major merger, I had the perfect reason to implement enhanced security measures in the executive conference areas. Under that justification, I arranged for audio monitoring in the main boardroom, a temporary precaution, fully documented, fully legal, signed off by compliance. I didn't expect to catch anything, but I did. The next morning, the system uploaded a flagged recording. I pressed play. What I heard will stay with me for the rest of my life. Grant's voice, Lila's laughter, the door clicking shut. Then Grant whispering, "Once the merger goes through, I'll push for your promotion. Just keep quiet about the numbers I gave you." My nails dug into my palms. He was leaking confidential financial data. He was promising a promotion in exchange for silence. And then, in a moment that made my vision blur with fury, I heard him kiss her. In the conference room. In my building. Under my authority. I sat frozen, unable to breathe, listening to the man I had defended for years unravel his entire career in a single conversation. Every word was a legal disaster. Violations of ethics, confidentiality, corporate law. This was no longer just my heartbreak. This was a corporate crime scene. And by the time I replayed the recording for the third time, one truth had crystallized in my chest. When he chose to humiliate me publicly at that brunch table, he had no idea that I already held the power to destroy every lie he'd ever told. When I returned to the brunch table, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the room itself knew something was about to break. Grant was in the middle of retelling the exact same joke he'd already delivered twice, leaning back like a king surveying his kingdom. His voice carried across the restaurant. "I mean, look at her," he laughed, gesturing toward me without even looking my way. "It's cheaper to keep her. Simple math." Someone chuckled nervously. Another avoided my eyes. Even the waiter, passing behind me, shifted uncomfortably. I sensed the unease ripple across the table, but Grant was too self-absorbed to feel it. I placed my knife and fork down gently, so gently it felt ceremonial. "Grant?" I said quietly. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he didn't care. He was still basking in the crowd's attention. "Grant!" I repeated, louder this time. He finally turned, smiling in that condescending way he saved just for me. "What? You're not going to start making a scene, are you, Ev? Come on, just laugh. It's a joke." A A joke. That word again. I reached slowly into my purse. My pulse was steady, almost eerily calm. My fingertips brushed the phone where the recording waited, coiled like a loaded weapon. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I think everyone should hear something, since you like performing so much." A few people at the table shifted in their seats. Grant frowned. "Ev, don't do this. Whatever you think." But I was already tapping the screen. The restaurant quieted, as if someone had dimmed the world. Then, a familiar click. The beginning of the recording. Grant's voice spilled into the open air. Unmistakable, intimate, corrupt. "Lock the door, Lila. No one checks these conference rooms on Fridays. I'll push your promotion through after the merger. Just keep quiet about the numbers I gave you." A soft gasp came from someone across the table. The sound of paper sliding, the muffled hum of the ventilation system, then Lila's voice, light, nervous, flirtatious. "Grant, we shouldn't talk about the financial reports here. What if someone hears?" "They won't," he whispered. "Now come here." The kiss that followed was loud enough to echo. It was the kind of sound that makes a person's soul fracture. Chairs scraped against the floor as people instinctively pulled back from Grant. One colleague muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered to her husband, "Is this real?" Grant's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of ash. "Ev, turn it off. Turn it off right now." But I didn't. The recording continued. His promises of a fabricated consulting bonus, instructions about the shell company, his bragging about manipulating corporate funds as if the company were his personal playground. Every word was a confession, every syllable an indictment. Across the table, Lila Monroe sat shaking, her knuckles white around her champagne flute. She couldn't look at me. She couldn't look at him. She knew exactly what this meant. Grant leaned forward, sweat forming at his temples. "Evelyn, stop. Please. We can talk about this at home." "We don't have a home anymore," I said softly. Silence followed. An enormous, suffocating silence that swallowed the entire restaurant. Even tables far from ours had gone still, glancing over, sensing the collapse of something monumental. I stood up. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't waver. I simply placed a crisp bill on the table, enough to cover my meal, and tucked my chair back into place. Grant reached out as if to grab my wrist, but I stepped away from him with a quiet finality that felt like freedom tearing through my ribs. "This," I said, meeting his panicked eyes, "is the last time you ever get to speak about me like I'm an asset." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was already ruined, and he knew it. I turned, walked past the stunned faces, past the waiter who stepped aside as though he were letting someone escape a crime scene, and pushed the door open into the cool Seattle air. Behind me, the silence of that restaurant collapsed into whispers, soft, horrified, electric. It was the sound of a kingdom falling, and I didn't look back. The morning after the brunch implosion felt unreal, quiet, cold, and too bright. Seattle's skyline looked sharper than usual as I rode the elevator up to the 32nd floor. Maybe it was just the knowledge that everything was about to break open. Maybe it was relief. By 8 a.m., the board of directors had already convened an emergency meeting. I walked into the conference room and immediately felt the tension. Tight jaws, stiff shoulders, coffee cups gripped too tightly. The CEO, a usually composed man in his 60s, looked shaken. "Evelyn," he said, motioning me forward. "Let's begin." They had already seen the recording. They had already reviewed the flagged transactions. What they needed now was clarity. I took my seat, opened my folder, and spoke with the same calm I'd carried out of that restaurant. "Everything I did," I began, "was documented, lawful, and done in accordance with HR ethics and compliance procedures. My responsibility is to protect this company from external threats, internal misconduct, and anything that puts our employees or shareholders at risk." No one interrupted me. I walked them through the timeline, the falsified degree, the unauthorized $75,000 transfer, the shell company, the hotel suite booked under corporate accounts, the misuse of confidential financial data. Every piece of evidence was precise. Every policy violation was undeniable. And every word Grant said in that recording was a nail in his own coffin. By the time I finished, the CEO exhaled slowly. "Good God," he murmured. "This could have destroyed us." The head of legal leaned forward. "Evelyn, what was your personal motivation for gathering this evidence?" I met his eyes, steady, unflinching. My motivation was the same as it's been for 12 years, to uphold the integrity of this company. What happened in my marriage is separate. My actions were not emotional, they were procedural. Silence washed over the room. Not doubt, respect. The board exchanged glances. Decisions were forming right there in front of me. Finally, the CEO spoke. Effective immediately, Grant Porter is suspended pending internal and federal investigation. I didn't blink. He will not return to the building, the CEO added. Security will escort him to collect his belongings. An hour later, I saw it happen through the glass wall overlooking the lobby. Grant, pale and hollow, standing beside a guard, holding a cardboard box. He looked up toward the executive floor as if trying to find me. But I stayed still, myself, unreachable. Lila didn't even get that courtesy. Her termination was immediate and brutal. Falsifying academic credentials violated company policy so severely, she wasn't allowed to retrieve anything from her desk alone. Her stunned expression as HR escorted her out told me she hadn't believed the consequences would reach her. But the thing about playing with fire is that eventually, someone gets burned. The investigation widened. For days, auditors dug through every financial decision Grant had made in the last 2 years. It didn't take long for the truth to surface like rot under polished wood. He had embezzled funds. He had manipulated financial reports. He had traded confidential information for personal gain. He had violated nearly every ethical and legal standard imaginable. When the final report was delivered to the board, the verdict was immediate. Grant Porter was terminated permanently. His case would be handed to federal financial investigators. The man who had once boasted that divorce was too expensive now faced something far costlier: the collapse of his power, his reputation, and his future. Later that week, the CEO called me into his office. "Evelyn," he said, "your integrity prevented a corporate catastrophe. Your leadership throughout this crisis has been exemplary. We'd like to offer you the role of West Coast Human Resources Director." It was a position beyond anything Grant had ever achieved, a promotion he had wanted for himself. A role he used to say I wasn't aggressive enough for. I accepted with a calm nod, though inside something bittersweet flickered. A quiet, steady strength I had forgotten belonged to me. As I walked out of the CEO's office, past the glass walls, past the skyline of the city where I had rebuilt myself overnight, one truth settled solidly in my chest. Grant had always believed he was untouchable. But integrity, once unleashed, is far more powerful than ego, and far more permanent. The day of the divorce signing felt strangely quiet, almost hollow, as if the world were holding its breath. I arrived early, sitting alone in a glass conference room overlooking downtown Seattle. The sky was gray, the kind of soft, muted gray that absorbs every sound. Then the door opened, and Grant walked in. Or rather, what was left of him walked in. He looked nothing like the man who once strutted through corporate hallways with the arrogance of someone who believed the universe bent around him. His suit hung off his frame. His skin was sallow. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were sunken, unfocused, desperate. He sat down across from me, hands trembling slightly. "Ev, we can fix this," he said, voice quivering. "You don't have to do this. We had a life." I folded my hands calmly. "Grant, the life you're talking about existed only in your head." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like he couldn't quite breathe. "You didn't have to ruin me." I didn't answer. The lawyer slid the papers across the table. Grant barely looked at them before panic set in. "This is insane," he snapped. "These terms, this division, it's completely unfair." "It's what your actions cost you," my attorney replied quietly. Grant's voice rose, cracking around the edges. "Evelyn, come on! You can't actually expect me to sign this. Think about what we had." "I did," I said softly. "For a long time." That was when anger burst through him. Familiar, sweeping, wild. "You wanted to destroy me. Admit it. You wanted to watch me suffer." I leaned back, meeting his gaze without blinking. "No," I said. "You destroyed yourself. All I did was press play." The words landed like a blow. His shoulders sagged. Whatever fire he had left extinguished right then. He picked up the pen, stared at it for a long moment, then finally signed with a shaky hand. His signature dragged across the page like a man being dragged into his own consequences. The divorce was finalized. And just like that, the chapter of my life that had once defined me came to an end. Not with screaming, not with drama, but with a soft scratch of ink on paper. Within days, the company and the media moved on. Grant became yesterday's scandal, replaced by updates about restructuring, new compliance systems, investor communications. He became a footnote in a story he once believed he controlled. But for me, something new began. Inside the company, people treated me differently, not with fear, but with respect. They saw me not as Grant Porter's wife, but as the woman who stood up for integrity when the company needed it most. I became a symbol of calm under pressure, of ethical leadership, of what it meant to stand firm even when everything around me was breaking. And then came the end-of-year gala. I stepped onto the stage in a room glittering with soft lights and polished glass. As West Coast HR director, I was asked to speak about transparency and rebuilding trust. Words came naturally, not rehearsed, not forced, simply honest. Integrity doesn't collapse under pressure, I said. It becomes clearer. Applause rose, warm and sincere. But then, as I scanned the crowd, my eyes caught a shadow near the back of the ballroom. Someone standing half behind a pillar, barely visible. It was Grant. I recognized him instantly, even in the dim light. He stood small, almost swallowed by the room. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze down, as if he no longer knew how to exist in the very world he once dominated. For just 1 second, our eyes met. I lifted my champagne glass, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had been broken, and everything that had been rebuilt. And under the music, under the soft hum of voices, I whispered words meant only for him. The truth only needed to be played back. He lowered his gaze. I walked away, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, beautifully free. Here is the English translation, natural and smooth for American, European audiences. If you've listened to this story from beginning to end, tell me, did you enjoy the way Evelyn stood up and reclaimed her life? Would you like me to continue writing stories about women rising after betrayal, or do you prefer themes of workplace drama, marriage, secrets, revenge, and healing? Comment below and let me know what you want to hear next. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories shared by women brave enough to tell their